This is the video tutorial for parallel lines. This is lesson 3.4. And as you can see on the picture here, we got a pair of parallel lines. And let's get into the warm-up question. Now, the warm-up question I'm going to go through because it actually has relevance for today's lesson. So when we're trying to find the slope of a line, as long as it's in the form y equals mx plus b, this slope-intercept form, the number in front of the x is going to be the slope. So as you can see here, all these questions start with y equals. So 3x plus 4, 3x. I'm looking at the 3. 7 minus 5x, negative 5x, so negative 5. So it's not just that it's the first number, it's the number with the x that's important. And I'm going to do those first three, and then hopefully you can do the other three as well. If you get them wrong, it'll tell you that you're wrong anyway. And then there was the reminder of the point slope formula, which is going to be important for today's lesson as well. So when we're doing the point slope formula, we start by writing out the coordinate, so negative 6, 2. You should label this coordinate, so x1 and y1. And we look at the slope in the question, and it says the slope is negative 5, 6. So I'm going to put down m equals negative 5, 6. There's a reminder of the formula here, y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. And that's something we need to start learning now because we're going to be using this on our test, upcoming test. Mx minus x1. And the reason we kind of label those points above is so when we're substituting into this formula, we can see quickly what these numbers are. So y1 I can see here is 2. So we put y minus 2. Now, I know some people wanted to put in y is 2 because it's a y coordinate. Just remember that when we have the equation of a line, there is a y and an x in this equation. So we do need a y and an x as we get to our answer, which is why we don't substitute in for those. M is negative 5, 6. And then x minus x1, so nothing for x, just put x. And then x1 for this question is negative 6. Now, we should be on the lookout straight away when we do our point slope questions. Are there any double negatives? So when we see here the two negatives, we know that that's going to give us a positive. So just make it into a positive straight away before we do our next step, which is a distributive rule. So distributive, that's where we're multiplying. So we're multiplying this negative 5, 6 times by both terms. If you want to put the little links in, just to remind you what you're multiplying. Negative 5, 6 times x is just negative 5, 6x. It's numbers first and then letter second. Negative 5, 6 times by positive 6. Use the Desmos calculator if necessary. And remember what you're actually doing here. Some people I notice will put in plus 6 here because that's what it says in the parentheses. You're timesing by positive 6. So we just got to make sure that we get this accurate, otherwise we'll get the wrong answer here. So I'm not going to put a positive to show them timesing by positive 6. I'm not actually sure if it'll even work, but let's give it a try. Yeah, there you go. You can see it works. So negative 5, 6 times by positive 6, and it will give you negative 5. So that goes here. And then at the end, we're trying to get them to say y equals. We want that slope intercept form. So instead of subtracting 2, as I want to move this to the other side, I do the opposite. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. That cancels. Oops. And then now I can just finish off this last bit. Apologies for the neatness of my writing here. Negative 5 plus 2, just check on Desmos just to make sure. But we think it's negative 3. Now, if we want to check to see if that is the correct answer, we can certainly type in that equation. So there's the equation. Just go back to the other slide. It's supposed to pass through this point here, negative 6, 2. So let's see if that's indeed true. Negative 6, 2. And you can see clearly this line does go through this point. So this is looking pretty good. I notice also, as I said, the slope was negative 5, 6. Notice I have negative 5, 6x. So I'm even more sure that it goes through here. So it's not just that it goes through this point, but it's also that it has the correct slope as well. And we can see both of those two things. Now, if we wanted to, we could also do this question by graphing as well. I'm not a particular fan of this, but just so we can see, we got the point plotted here. We got negative 5, 6, and then think about what this slope means. So it means you go down 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you go across 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And notice that would take you right through this negative 3. And that negative 3 is the same negative 3 that we had down here. We already know the slope is going to be negative 5, 6x because it tells us that in the question. So we could fill that part in straight away if we wanted to by putting an x here and then finding out what the intercept is. But just another way of thinking about it. Now, as we look at parallel lines, which is our topic for today, we're going to do this in 3 points and in 3 sections. First of all, we're going to look at the ones that are given to us when the equation is, oops, this is actually supposed to say in slope-intercept form. I didn't realize that as I was working through this. So here's our parallel lines here. You can see that they're parallel just by looking at them, but notice the slopes. So notice the slope for this one is 1/2, and notice the slope for this one is 1/2 as well. So lines that are parallel have the same slope, and that's the important factor we're going to use for this lesson. So that table we had in the warm-up here, if we know a line has slope of 3, then a line parallel to that will have the same slope. So in other words, 3. A line that has slope of -5, one parallel to that would be -5, and so on. And we're going to use that fact today. And this goes back very similar to the point slope lesson. And if you missed that, you should certainly go and check that out first before continuing with this video. So we have our coordinate here, -4, 5. So I'm going to write that out and I'm going to label x1, y1. And this time, instead of telling us the slope, they've given us a fact. They've said that it's parallel to this graph here. So I know for my equations, if it starts with y equals, then I know this number in front of the x is the slope. So 1/2 is my slope for this question. And that's how I can summarize this. So once we've got those key facts down, everything else is actually the same as what we just did in the warm-up. You're going to write out the formula, you're going to plug in the numbers, and so on. So let's go ahead. Y1, it says is 5. The slope, it says, is 1/2. And x minus x1. So x minus, and x1 itself is -4. So before I do that distributive rule, I want to look for my double negatives because I know that they make a positive. Now I can go ahead and multiply this out. 1/2 times x is 1/2 x, and 1/2 times 4. If you're not sure, just go ahead and use your calculator. It should be 2, and therefore I'm going to put +2. To make it say y equals, I want to move this -5 to the side, which I do by doing the opposite. So the opposite of subtracting 5 is to add 5. That would cancel. And then I would get y equals 1/2 x. That doesn't change. And +2 plus 5 is +7. So notice we do have the correct slope. You can see that the slope is 1/2 here, as it says. And then it's just +7. If we want to check our answer, we can certainly type in this equation, type in this point, and just make sure that this line does indeed go through this point. And there's a couple of questions for you to try. So here's our point, 5, 1. So we have that part already done. Parallel to y equals 3/5 x. So there's the slope, 3/5. Parallel lines have the same slope. So I've copied this down. And then there's my formula. Now might be a good time just to pause the video, have a try on the question yourself. And then once you've had a try, look at the rest of the video. So as I'm plugging numbers in for this then, y1, it says it is 1. My slope is 3/5. So I'm just going to fill that in here. X minus x1, so x minus 5. No double negatives this time, so I can just go ahead and start distributing here. 3/5 times x is just going to be 3/5 x. And once again, apologies for the neatness. 3/5 times -5. Use your Desmos calculator to check this one, but it should come out as -3. And then opposites. So instead of subtracting 1, I'm going to add 1. That cancels. And then y equals 3/5 x again, and -3 plus 1. Once again, if you're not sure, check on a Desmos calculator. It would be -2. And then we're good for this. Once again, notice it's the same slope as it has here, as it should be. So really all we're checking is if you type in this line here and this point here, just make sure that line does go through that point. We know it's the correct slope. And then there's one for you to try as well. So once again, you might want to pause the video for this one and have a try on it. I am just going to go straight to the answer. There's the steps. Have a look through, just make sure everything makes sense. But really, it's that same idea. Write down the coordinate and label. Look for the slope of the line. As it starts with y equals, it's just the number in front of the x. And then you follow through those same steps. If we've got double negatives like we would here, subtract -8. Those two negatives become a plus, and so on. Now, the second part to this is parallel lines from graphs. And this question is definitely a little bit more difficult. Now, we'll kind of ignore this just for a second because we want to focus on the picture. Write the equation in slope-intercept form that passes through the given point, so that's the dot here, and is parallel to the line drawn. So they haven't strictly told us what this coordinate is, so we've got to look to see what it is. Now, I can see that it's level with 1 on the x-axis, and I can see that it's level with, -3 on the y-axis, which is why I've put my point here as 1, -3. So not particularly difficult, but there's just a little extra step that you have to do. Now, to find the slope, I got to look for 2 points that lie on the line. So we normally use the y-intercept. I don't want to use the x-intercept because it's not a whole number here. So I'm going to go along the line. Oh, pretty quickly we found it. Look for a place on the line that goes through the corner of a square. So here would be perfect. So rise over run, I rise 2 squares, and then I run 1 square. So my slope is 2 over 1, and 2 divided by 1, of course, is 2. Once you've got those 2 points, all these steps are the same as in the previous lesson and in the examples that we saw earlier. So we'll just leave it at that point. There is one to try here as well. So this point here looks like, that looks like 8. And the y value looks like -4. So that would be my coordinate. So this is what I would put as x1, y1. And then for the slope, looks like it does go through a whole number this time on the x-axis. So I'm going to use that this time. And I'll use the y-axis as well. So I go down 1, 2, 3. Then I go across 1, 2, 3, 4. So the slope, so I'm going to put m would equal -3 over 4. And then now you can do those same methods as before. Label this x1, y1, and then substitute into that point slope formula. There was one to try here, but I think this is kind of complicated. A lot of people thought that this went through -6 on the x-axis, and it's very close. If you zoom in, you'll notice it's close. Really, the point, the corner of the square that it goes through is actually here and here. Now, you could try and go higher, but if you go above this, there's no points actually on this part to go through a whole number square. So the slope for this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the slope of this line is 6 over 5, which I don't think was particularly easy to see. Normally they would make it a lot clearer than that. But you can certainly try the rest of that question as well. Now, the last type of question is parallel lines when we use equations that are not in slope-intercept form. So for this one here, so that was the answer to the earlier question that we had. And that was the answer to the other question if you wanted to check through the steps. So before we get to that, there's a little review question we're going to look at. So when I ask the slope for this one, people sometimes half remember and say, oh, look, it's the number in front of the x, so the slope's 3. That's only true if it says y equals. So for this question, it doesn't say y equals. This one's actually in standard form. I got x and y on the same side. So when I have x and y on the same side, I want to move the x's to the other side. So to move something, I got to do the opposites. So instead of 3x, I would do -3x. Do the same on both sides. -3x, -3x. There we go. I get left with y and 2 minus 3x. That's it. It's just 2 minus 3x. Okay, they're not like terms, so we can't subtract them. But now, as we know what y equals is, you can clearly see that the slope is just the number in front of the x, which would be -3. We're going to use that answer in a minute too. X minus y equals 0. Same sort of thing here. This does not say y equals right now, so I can't just say that it's 1x here. So to move x to the side, I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Now 0 take away x, I can actually simplify for this one because 0 is nothing. So all I get left with is -x. Now remember this is -1y, so we could just say I'm going to divide both sides by -1. The way I prefer to say this is I'm going to do the opposite of both. So I don't want -y, I just want positive y. So I'm going to change the signs. So if it says -y, I'm going to put positive y. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. If it says -x, I'm going to put positive x. And then now I can find out the slope. Now it says y equals. So how many x's do we have? 1. And therefore the slope of this line is 1. Now, the real question was actually this. Write the equation in slope-intercept form that passes through -3, -2. There's our point. We labeled it x1, y1. And parallel to this line here. So that was why we did those little steps on 26. Make it say y equals and find that slope. We saw it was -3. And notice I put my slope as -3. And then we just do that same method that we worked through on the previous lessons. And also at the start of today's lesson too. And the last one, we found the slope of this was 1. So there's my slope. And then here's my coordinate, 7, -2. And we can work it out that way. Now, I believe that's the last slide. There is one other way. For people that find this rearranging idea really difficult, there is one other way we can actually do this. So I'm going to remember 3x plus y equals 2. And I'm going to go back to the last Desmos calculator so we can use that. Here we go. So if you prefer, you can actually type in the question as well like this. And then we can actually look for my slope. I can count my squares out for here. So I can see that it goes through this point here. So I go down 1, 2, 3, and then go across 1, and I get back to the line. And if we just check, -3 divided by 1 is -3. So same answer. The other question that we had was x minus y equals 0. And same thing. From the picture here, I can see that it goes up 1 and across 1. So 1 divided by 1 is 1. That's another way of finding out the slope if you prefer by counting squares. Sometimes it works well. Sometimes it's easier just to rearrange it, but at least you have a couple of options now. And that does it for this video. And if necessary, go back and watch 3.2 if you need more help on the point slope.